Hello, my name is Jonathan Forster, and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking podcast on interior design. I'm an interior designer and educator. My job is to improve quality of life and productivity by helping people to create beautiful and practical spaces to live and work in. The Multi-Story Thinking podcast takes an educational slant to the interior design world. If, like me, you are curious about how things are done within the industry, want to know how people got their breaks and how they've developed their careers, and get some top tips and advice, then this is the podcast for you. So sit back, relax, as we help unravel the mysteries of interior design. Daniel Heath is a British award-winning independent wallpaper, textile and surface designer, renowned for his illustrative and engaging designs. Based in the heart of East London, he has long upheld principles of craftsmanship and sustainable design through upcycling and re-appropriation of authentic heritage materials. Daniel makes bespoke hand-printed wallpapers and crafted interior surfaces for individuals and corporate clients that combine drawings and production skills with traditional crafts and modern technologies. In this episode, we discover the importance of narrative and storytelling, the opportunities and challenges of working with salvaged materials, the perfect circle of inspiration, materials, translation and outcome, and why you shouldn't ask Dan to draw unicorns and rainbows. The work that you do is really fascinating, and it's one of those areas of interior design which is sort of, I don't know, underutilized perhaps, or overlooked, or at worst just considered as a sort of like purely decorative thing, whereas your stuff sort of goes a bit deeper than that. But so yeah, it's really exciting to have you on.
Thanks very much for having me on. Yeah, I mean certainly I'm conscious that I operate within a niche, and I think that's what's helped me to continue to be able to do it. Really, is that I don't need a huge audience. I just need enough people that like my stuff, really, to keep me going. So
yeah,
it's allowed me to maybe do things that are more interesting to me, at least.
I think what's really great about that is that you demonstrate that you can operate within a niche like that and have an amazing sort of breadth of work, and it's focused, isn't it? I think that's what's great, because everyone's trying to find their career and try and do every job that comes along and be everything to everybody, but you really got a sort of unique take on things, which I guess is about your own interests and how you want to develop as a creative person. But
yeah, it definitely depends on, I suppose, in what you want to achieve. And I think for me, operating and doing what I do, if I wanted to increase sales, or if I was driven by that, I might engage more with trends or look at what's happening and try and fit around that. But I don't feel like I need to do that, conversely to what my wife does, which is very much to do with that and directing people in terms of what's happening. I get obviously that information from Laura when we talk at home, but almost, I'm small enough not to have to worry too much about that, and to stick to my my key objectives, really, which are to continue to draw stuff and explore themes that I like, and then find ways that are interesting to me and hopefully to others of translating that into an outcome that can be used in a space.
I noticed on a lot of your website the presence of drawing as being a starting point, I guess, for the end result, which is really great to see, someone who can draw.
Yeah,
I don't know whether they still teach that in at art schools and stuff so much, but it's
Yeah.
a great skill. But the application of that then into surface design, how would you describe it? Surface design, and more specifically towards interiors, how did that develop?
Yeah. Well, I always liked drawing. You know, as a kid, I was always drawing stuff. One of the first things that I recall drawing was drawing from Wildlife on One, you know, and drawing the animals and things like that after watching that as a family. So I always liked drawing, but I never really saw myself as like an artist. So I was quite relieved to find that I could kind of do the drawing and then have an application that bridged somewhere in between, you know, kind of design and art. And you know, when I'm making something like a wall covering, you know, like the bespoke engraved surfaces or the wallpapers, I know that they're quite impactful in a space. So I feel like that's the best possible outcome for my imagery, and maybe it reaches further, you know, because I can do those things again and again in different ways for different people, but maybe more people get to see it that way.
You've got themes running through the work that can go onto different mediums and different parts of the space as well.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little bit, I mean, it's not the most accessible because it is still quite bespoke and there's a cost that's attached to that, but it's maybe a bit more accessible than if it were fine art, perhaps. Well, definitely, you know, more accessible than if it were fine art.
Yeah, and do you see there's a difference in its application? It's not necessarily like a piece of framed art, although, well, some of them are more sort of integrated to the structure or the surface of an interior, so they become more of a interior element rather than something placed within a space.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I have a lot of fun with it, really, is kind of working out ways in which to apply it into a space and that integration and the sort of giant puzzle aspect, which really came from working, you know, that was enabled by working with Vitruvius, who are an interior design, architecture and salvage company. So they have all these materials. When I started working with them, they sort of enabled me to kind of literally draw my designs 3D within a space, you know, going across different surfaces and working around the fixtures and being handed drawings, you know, architectural drawings and elevations, and working from those to make the application truly bespoke has been just so much fun, you know. Like, I think when I was a kid and I always used to take toys to pieces and try and put them back together, like a lot of creative people probably did. And yeah, just the kind of problem solving, the working things out and going, okay, well, I don't want to draw a lovely bird there because it's going to have a tap coming out of its beak, you know. So there's a practical aspect to it, but it's a fun creative challenge.
So that's bespoke to the space. That's a really nice way to work. And the recycled, you know, on your website, salvaged and crafted artisan surfaces, the interest in different surfaces that you're applying your work to, and also the recycled or reclaimed. At what point did that start becoming part of what you were interested in?
Well, that sort of it sort of came about by accident, in that that was Vitruvius that sort of directed me towards that, because they'd already commissioned me to do some wallpaper when I was studying at Royal College. It was one of my first commissions, was to produce some wallpaper for them, and they'd seen me in a magazine and got in contact. And then when I went to go and see them, Maria Speak just said, "Oh, have a look around the warehouse, and if you see anything that you think you can work with or you'd like to try working with, pick it up, take it with you, and then come back to us." And I just knew that was an opportunity for me, you know, to branch out from what I was doing, but also to potentially have this client that would help to would mentor me through, into new aspects of my career, which at that point I was a student, so my career was kind of non-existent. So I went with that, and then I found that it was such a fantastic and interesting way to work for me. It was so appropriate. I kind of kept with it because it added an extra layer of narrative, so the narrative within the drawing and the development of the imagery was one aspect, but then all of a sudden you had this material that had a history, and it had it had all this embedded meaning, and just I thought how fantastic to be able to have this opportunity to explore how I can work with other materials. And also I knew that I had the support of them they had joiners and things like that. So working on the wood, we did some things with granite and marble in the past. We did the slate things at different times. And the very first one that we did actually was they had these oak panels that came from the Natural History Museum. And it couldn't have been more perfect for me at that time, because I was studying around the corner from the Natural History Museum, and all of that imagery I was already working on, the taxidermy bird stuff, was drawn from these cases. And those cases were getting ripped out and chucked away by the Natural History Museum because they were not archival quality. So all the specimens that they had in these drawers, they had to put them into something that was appropriate to preserve them. So all this old Victorian cabinetry got ripped out. Vitruvius picked it up, and they had stacks and stacks of these, what were drawer bases, solid oak drawer bases from all the smashed up furniture. So I then put that imagery back onto it. So it almost went full circle. And I think that was the catalyst for a lot with Vitruvius, because they loved the outcome. And then it rearranged my brain a bit, I think, talking to them and talking about materials and people's emotional attachment to it, and how you can build a strong narrative just through the things that you work on, as opposed to just the imagery side of things and storytelling in that way.
Yeah, so you've got the not only the narrative, but also just the physical characteristics of that material, which are contributing to your design.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I started working with them, I started to look at the projects that they did, and I knew how invested they were in in creating these rich interiors, that had a lot of feeling in there, and they weren't homogenized, and it was so different. It was so refreshing for me to see that, especially at a time, when I started working with them, would have been 2006 or something like that. In interiors, you're kind of at a peak of the kind of Scandi minimalism, and you saw their stuff, and it was, it was full of character, and some of the things that we worked on with them, the lab tables that came from the schools, you'd get them and they'd be just covered in school kids graffiti, with biros engraved in, noughts and crosses, such and such is a knob, and all of this sort of stuff. And we kept a lot of that in, because again, it's just another layer of, and people can relate to it, and people feel like they're part of that, the story of that material.
So do you get the material and then think what the illustration, if you like, or the imagery is going to be? Or, I mean, I can see the obvious link between the Natural History Museum and some of the themes you're working with, but do you allow the material to guide you in the end result?
Sometimes you do, from a practical standpoint as well, going back to the kind of problem solving. Some materials work better with some imagery than others. Some materials are really difficult to work with because of the weight, and so you can only use certain processes on them, like pool table slates, like the the beds, the pool tables. I think we did some stuff with that once, and I did some work with some basalt, but it was so heavy you couldn't put it on certain machines. You couldn't put it on a lathe and things like that. And then, you have to think about the process and what's going to work, what's going to stay on the surface. And so some of that does dictate the imagery. But a lot of the time, working with a client like Vitruvius, they've done things with me in the past. So they'll just say, the customer really likes this, but maybe they'd like it leaning more towards this or towards that. And then I'll work from there. But yeah, I think the oak is probably the most complete story in terms of that circle of kind of inspiration, material, translation, outcome,
Yeah. And what was the application for that material then? Was it used? Where was it used?
It was used in, we did an exhibition actually at the Vitruvius warehouse for Design Week. We did an exhibition in there, and then we used it on projects. We did a commercial space, Rupert Sanderson shoe shop, and then we did a lot of stuff for domestic, people's homes.
Yeah.
But what was quite nice about it, and slightly frustrating, was that it was just a finite amount of material. There were only X amount of those panels, and they at one point were in the warehouse at Vitruvius, stacked up to the ceiling, and you'd see them going down, and then they'd email me and say, we've got a project with the oak. It's probably going to be the last one because we've only got about 100 panels left. And you knew that some of the panels you could work with, some you couldn't because they'd be split or warped really badly. But yeah, when they ran out, it was kind of like, okay, well, what's next?
That's quite sad, isn't it? That's sort of, but maybe that just gives them more impact, limited.
Yeah, I think in a way it kind of adds to the exclusivity and the provenance. It's like there was only X amount, and they came from there, and that's that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with some of the other materials, like they're all finite, I guess, but some materials that they get hold of and we get hold of, they are plentiful. Like the salvaged Oroco desktops we use so widely in schools. You see them everywhere in salvage yards, and it's an incredible material. But I mean, it was used everywhere, and then replaced with that horrible laminate chipboard that contractors would have to replace every year. So that's quite nice in terms of it. You being able to use it time and time again. And then the roof slates. I moved on to the roof slates after that oak ran out, because I thought, okay, I've invested quite a lot of imagery into this product, into this kind of thing, and maybe I like the story, the salvage, and that aspect of it, and I need something that's sustainable, but sustainable for me, that I can get more of it, that I don't have to rely on an extremely limited, finite amount of something. So the salvage roof slates, I go to a slate yard now, and they let me pick them out because sometimes they're not so great. But yeah, and there's always loads. And I think, you think how many roofs there are, even just around an area of London, a lot get replaced. And actually people are moving back to using slates again, but there's loads of it. I mean, I've got a stack of it right here next to me now. So yeah, we use that quite a lot. And that's quite nice, because I had to readjust my thinking, because I thought, okay, well, I want to develop something that I can keep using for years in interiors,
Yeah. Just talk us through the process of taking the image onto those products. You obviously start with the drawing. What's the process of engraving or?
So the slate, any of the materials that are engraved, are probably the least romantic in terms of process, because it's done using a laser. I have a laser engraver here, but I suppose what it lacks in, because people love to see me screen printing the wallpaper and things like that. So that creates a nice story for people. But the story with the slate is within where it comes from, its provenance, and then the drawing side of things. So I'll do a drawing and I'll split the drawing into whatever size modules are achieved with that material. You know, you would split the artwork into panels, and then you'd work with a joiner and work with the drawing in sections and make sure that you could direct them to reconstruct this thing again. And with the slate, again, you know, it's that technical working out. Are we going to have an overlap in the slate? Are they going to butt together? What are the slate section sizes and where does everything go? And then I'll do the drawing. Quite often I'll have, I've got a catalogue of imagery that I've drawn in the past that I can pull sections out and use and reposition, and then join things together, add in additional elements like extra. If people want a particular type of bird, if it's the bird stuff, the geometric stuff, what I've got sometimes won't fit well. You know, if we want it to be really symmetrical across the space, then how do I use those components to build up something that really works? So yeah, that's kind of basically how it comes together. And then I prepare the material. There's quite a lot of sifting through. With the slate, I try to get slate all of one color because it can range from green to purple, blue to grey to more black. So I sort of choose the color, and I hand cut it all. I hand cut all the slate in the studio with a big sort of crushing guillotine thing, and that's really satisfying to do. But there is an aspect of waste to that because not all the slates make it through that process. But then again, you know, they're already salvaged. So if you lose 10%, and it's slate, so it goes back into the environment, and that's not a big problem. But yeah, and then it gets engraved. And I do put a treatment on it, which is like you would use on any stone surface in a home, that just prevents it from, because slate's quite porous. You know, if you're using it in a kitchen, you don't want it to absorb all the fats and things like that you might be cooking with. So we just treat it just to give it more longevity. Plus, it's been outside for maybe 50 years or something. So you've got to scrub it down and make it presentable again.
Yeah. So on those interior applications, are you typically working with an architect or a designer? And do they give you to what extent are you briefed on the outcome?
It depends on the client. So I'll work with an interior designer, or usually it's an interior designer or architect. They'll send me, or a furniture maker. I do panels that go into furniture as well. They'll tell me what they're thinking, and usually they've seen my work, so I get quite a lot of creative freedom. And sometimes I'll give them sort of options, variations. You know, do you want this one with more etching on, or this with less? And sometimes there'll be a particular thing that they want adding in, a particular bird or a particular animal or aspect. Usually that's within the scope of the things that I would like to draw anyway. So they don't say, oh, can we have unicorns and rainbows? And if they do, I say, not really, because it's not where I want to go. So yeah, I have a good relationship, and as soon as I establish that with an interior designer, I tend to work with them on several projects, so they know the deal.
Yeah, they've got an idea of the sort of thing you're going to produce. Our kind of fans of unicorns are going to be disappointed. But does that come back from like early interest in natural history then, or is there something about what you're drawing that's nicer to draw, or is there more?
Yeah, I think at the time when I started to do those drawings, it was an interest in natural history, in natural history, in birds, in animals in general. But I was also looking at this kind of macabre. I really liked going and seeing the collections of people like the what's the one in Oxford, Pitt Rivers, and then the Horniman, John Horniman, was it? The Horniman Museum down in Lewisham, the Booth Museum down in Brighton. I liked the idea and the narrative and the storytelling of collectors going to faraway lands and shooting things and bringing them back, and that being like something that they wanted to do to help educate people about the scale of Earth and the variety of nature and things that are there. So, and then there's the kind of macabre element of the kind of stuffing these animals and putting them in these kind of static. I love those static kind of, particularly Horniman Museum, where you've got the animals that are stuffed and they've hand painted the environment in the background, and then you've got this kind of pool of resin with these kind of
frozen in time, yeah,
beavers in them, So I loved all that, and for me, that narrative was an extension of what was explored in the circus theme that I've done before, because a lot of the people from the circus, they were doing the same thing. They were bringing, and this is quite dark, but they were collecting people as specimens for their traveling circus, like pygmies and normally they were attached to tea trade, the tea trades and the fur trade, and these rich business owners that would go and just as a hobby collect specimens of people and animals and things and bring them back to show to people. As much as that's awful now, and it was, they really thought that they were doing a service to people by educating them about the world. They thought it was a philanthropic kind of venture. And so all of that kind of questionable, I think I loved all of that idea, and how it just interested me how, changing perspectives on things, there was so much to unpack from it. And then, to make a wallpaper seemed quite easy actually, because there was so much narrative.
It's a rich kind of starting point, isn't it? And I think that's looking across your work, and also the way in which you sort of work through those themes with different applications, and even simply different colorways. There's an opportunity to really explore in lots of directions. Yeah,
and I say it to students a lot. That when you're choosing a theme, you've got a starting point. You've really got to pull that thread. You owe it to yourself to do the research. To make the theme engaging for yourself, so that you can maintain your interest and build up the richness of the narrative. You've got to keep looking and keep digging and keep finding things, and who are the key protagonists, or what are the key moments within all of that, and where can it go next? And if you find something that captivates you like that, not only does it give you enough fuel and fodder for the development of kind of interesting outcomes, but it gives you a narrative that you can retell to other people, so that they feel like they're being told a story and they're part of it. I think that's really important. It's vital, really.
Do you think that, particularly when you're producing something bespoke, relatively high value, that helps to kind of sell in the concept, that it's got more than just a decorative application, it's got a story behind it? Absolutely.
Yeah. It's about making people feel engaged with it. I always, particularly with the wallpapers, I used to think, if you had people over for a dinner party and, you had the wallpaper, there's a talking point, they're conversational. For me, it's really important to give my customers, make them feel like they're a part of that. So when something's commissioned, that they can say, oh, I met this guy and this is what he does, and this is the story that we told through the outcome, and this is the story that I want to tell to you through my home, and through this interior that I've had made for me, and it's like it gives them something that they can pass on, and it's interesting. So yeah, I think it helps as a selling point. It helps as a selling point, and it helps to engage with your audience in that way, so that they have something that they can pass on the story, really.
Yeah. Looking at your wallpapers, the screen printed ones are all, well, not all of them, lots of them hand printed.
Yeah.
In a traditional technique, I suppose. Is that, I mean, that's great to see that sort of thing. And it sort of reminds me of some of those old videos of, old wallpaper factories.
Yeah.
But you also done some commissions for example, DFS. You've got some more, would you describe them as more commercial products, or more commercially produced products?
Yeah, absolutely. More commercial. I've done collaborations with various people over the years, DFS probably being the most recent. And as much as it's not the same audience as the rest of my work, what interested me was that they came to me and they wanted me to create a story, and they wanted to engage with the story of making that they felt was missing from people's perception of them as brand. And DFS had been hand making furniture, in the Midlands. And I went to their, been doing it for years, for decades, 50 years. And I went to go and see them, and I was surprised by their workshops, and it made that collaboration a bit easier for me to go, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this. But also they wanted to talk about, they wanted me to come up with a concept that was based around the athletes for the Olympics being away from home, or, well, just being there in Tokyo, and what that might mean. And I then sort of brainstormed around the idea of it being postcards from home, and they knew that they wanted a certain look that was based on the ukiyo-e, the Japanese woodcut style. So I had some things to work from there, but really, the coming up with the idea and concepting it had to go through their approval. But I had some creative freedom there to tell a story as well, and it was nice to kind of look at the landscape, particularly at that time, in the middle of lockdown. What's on the doorstep? What I certainly discovered amazing, kind of places to go to that were just not walkable or cyclable from home. And I thought, what great kind of vistas and views there were for us to explore in that project. So I normally I collaborate with people if I feel like there's an interesting direction to take. Quite often, obviously, they have a bigger audience than I do, so it worked really well for me in that respect as well. But then they were also able to piggyback on perhaps the integrity of making, and the things that they wanted to get from that collaboration was, this artisan, a link to an artisan in a particular way.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just looking at it, you're almost commissioned as part of a marketing strategy, aren't you? There, in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're like you say, piggybacking on that maker heritage and also the narrative of home and what that means to us, and referencing Tokyo. There's I imagine quite a lot for you to get your teeth into there in terms of themes. But being part of it's not like you're producing something they're going to roll out and sell in huge amounts. It's a different relationship there, isn't it? Part of a strategy rather than just product making.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it started off actually where the pattern work was going to be more prominent on the outcome, but their audience is quite conservative. So I kind of knew from the offset that it wasn't going to be, because I know that what I do is maybe more than what their customers would want, in terms of there's a lot going on in that, and there's a lot of, and my aesthetic is probably quite niche. So it did very much become part of their marketing thing.
Yeah, I think I mean, just looking on their website, and are beautiful cushions, and I suspect they probably sold more of those plain grey sofas on the back of
Yeah.
them, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
just because it sort of, it makes it look, well, the color is great. The neutral background, you know, emphasizes the designs, but it makes it look like a complete scheme of which they're buying a part of, you know, they'll buy the sofa
Yeah.
perhaps, you know, but
I'm kind of used to that as well within my own work, you know. And years ago, I did some stuff for Heels. We did a cushion collection, and I knew, you know, the Heels thing in particular. Actually, we had a lot of press, and in the press, they like to feature the out there stuff. You know, the stuff, the element of the collection that's most eye catching, and then what happens is people are drawn in to go and look at it in the shop, and then they lose their nerve a little bit and they get the blue one, you know. So if it works in that way, and I'm glad that I kind of understood that when working with DFS, because I knew that, yeah, their customer base was not going to be buying into that necessarily. I knew that they were going to get the cream or the beige, and that was the way it was going to go. But yeah, it was nice to be a part of it, and obviously I loved being a part in some small way of the whole Olympic thing, because I loved 2012, you know, and what that meant in London. And yeah, I also kind of felt really sorry for the athletes who trained so hard to go out there, and then it just be a bit of a nothing because they couldn't have the fans there, they couldn't, you know, so much of it was lessened, you know.
yeah, that sort of performance, the adulation of performance, you know, I think that's quite strong, isn't it, as a motivating factor, or certainly to heighten performance if you've got the crowd behind you, you know. Seemed like everybody in the 2012 Olympics had an extra sort of 10%, didn't they, because they were being cheered on. I like the sort of emphasis on the making. I mean, that's clearly a very important part of your methodology or your philosophy, isn't it? The actual making process of it.
Yeah, it's really important, and I think that they knew that when they started to work with me, obviously because they wanted to have that as an aspect. But even when I went to go and see them, they were very keen to show me that underpinned that collection. You know, they were showing me the joinery in the construction of the furniture pieces, almost to say, you know, don't worry, we're honoring these aspects in these ways, you know. And yeah, it was nice to see.
I mean, that's upholstery. It's all hidden. Well, not all hidden, but the framework certainly disappears.
Yeah, and they kept on the arms of the chair, you know, there's a bit that I don't know if you can see in any of the promotional imagery, but the joinery, even just between the two elements of the frame, and there's two different types of timber that are used. And they wanted to use something that was just kind of, I think they used one joinery aspect that was similar to a traditional Japanese joinery. And I just thought, I like that. You know, that's attention to detail, and it might not be throughout, it might only be in aspects, but it's at least, it's paying homage, you know.
How much control do you get over the installation of your work when you're producing stuff for interiors?
I normally, sometimes when customers buy directly from me, they ask me for recommendations for people that can do things, which is good, because I know good people, but they're not necessarily cheap. And sometimes people have problems with installing because they'll get a builder in that will not necessarily be a specialist if it's the wallpaper for hanging artisan wallpaper. They've hung vinyl, you know, for years. And so there's a little bit of, you know, I try to give as much advice as I can from the outset, you know, to say, look, you know, if you want to, it's like if people want to have something upholstered, they'll go, I want to get your fabric on this chair. And I go, well, find an upholsterer first. And here's a few people to talk to, because quite often people don't understand that how expensive that can be to get it done right. Yeah, I try to give as much advice as I can if I'm not sort of intrinsically involved in the project in the installation, I'll try and say, look, have a look at this first.
Yeah.
Quite often, if it's working with an interior designer, I'll send through suggestions. If it's working with the joiner, if we're doing a piece, then normally we'll concept it with the designer, and then I'll talk to the joiner and go, right, okay, how much gap do I need between this and this? Where are you going to put your handles? What do you need from me to make it work technically? And then, whether it works better for me to work on panels or for me to work on finished doors, or does it need to go from them to me back to them again? And because the last thing you want to do is then say, oh, well, we had to sand it back, and you're like, okay, well, that's not going to work. So yeah, there has to be communication and collaboration. You have to be open to working things out and working with different people that can help realize it, because it doesn't happen without them. I can't go in there and hang the wallpaper. I can't go in there and cut out the doors and put them on, So I rely on those people, and that communication has to work it out, really.
Yeah, that's, I can imagine. Yeah, I'll be sort of totally paranoid about handling something like that, because you think this is the only one that we've got. Don't want to cut it by mistake.
Yeah. So clear communication, that's really key, and asking the right questions. With new customers, I'll outline how it has to work, because they don't, sometimes they'll say, oh, can you come in, if they've not worked with me before, can you come in and etch on this wardrobe, and I'll say, no, you have to send the panels so that I can work on the panels, and I have to outline exactly how it could work and things to watch out for. Like if there's any raised edges, we have to be mindful of how that goes into the machine or how it might be printed on. So yeah, there's lots of, I don't find it boring, but I imagine a lot of people would, but just kind of working out the puzzle and the logistics of how everything works and how it comes together.
Yeah. That's nice. You're talking about those details of the sofa briefly. What sort of things would you describe are the details of the work that you produce that sort of stand out in a similar way?
I guess there's not a lot of people that, I think wallpaper murals are quite popular, and I don't do those because of the way it's produced. But I guess the kind of the flexibility of what I can offer in terms of creating bespoke artwork and how it goes into a space. And then I think the other thing that people like, that draws people to me, is that I'm small enough that they can send me a color chip from a scheme, from whatever, and I can incorporate that within the wallpaper because I'm printing it by hand. So people are often daunted by commissioning artisans to do things, to work on stuff, because they don't know how the commissioning process works. And actually, I like to try and make it as easy for them as possible, and you go, okay, well, these are the things we can do and these are the things we can't do. But I think, if you went to a bigger company for wallpaper, their minimums for producing anything different would be so vast. You'd have to make 200 rolls of something if you wanted a coloured background. Whereas I get the paint out and I roll it onto the wallpaper and then I print it, So people, when you outline it to people like that, they go, oh, right. Oh, okay. Oh, so I can have this and it's not too much of an issue. And you go, no, there's a small fee on top, but yeah, you can have that in 3 rolls in that green, no problem.
Yeah.
So I think people quite like that. There's this kind of, it strikes a balance between, okay, well, there's this idea that that it's quite complicated to get anything made that's bespoke, and then when they actually talk to the person, it's actually quite simple.
It's building in the time and the opportunity, isn't it, to the process?
Yeah, because I'm conscious that people are going out on a limb to get me to do something for them. because they, they could just walk down to a shop. They could go to anywhere on the King's Road and buy a really nice wallpaper. So I feel like, well, they've invested in me, and so there's an element of giving back to them, and that is through making the process accessible for them, but also giving them that extra little bit of kind of storytelling that they come away with from that. They haven't just gone to a shop. We quite often build like a really good relationship with the customer, because it's quite personal. What they want and how you interpret it is meaningful, rather than just buying something. So I quite like that. I like that aspect.
Do you have a sense of what they're delivering as part of the whole scheme, or is there an aim, or are you given an idea about what your work needs to contribute in the whole concept?
That's what's quite nice working with interior designers, because if a customer buys my wallpaper directly from the website, it's always great because it's an order, but it's almost like you've not been part of the conversation. You're just dropped into it, so you don't know where it's going. Sometimes they'll send you a picture of the outcome, but when you're on a concepting board with a client, with an interior designer, you get to see the overall feel of it and where you fit into it, and that's really nice, because you can become more engaged with the overall outcome. And then the other bonus is that if an interior designer photographs the outcome, you get to see the context of your work, because sometimes you send stuff off and you never see the outcome. Sometimes I work on projects and it doesn't really get photographed, and it's somebody's private space, so you don't really get to go into it. But if they photograph it and you see those images, you go, yes, somebody else has got a vision for the things that I do as well. It's that's really special, I think, being part of somebody else's vision.
Yeah, that's nice. Sort of collaborative approach, isn't it? To creating the space and adding value. Yeah. I think that sort of thing where it's the sort of thing that, an interior designer, you could try and make some pattern, couldn't you? But whenever anyone wants something decorative on a wall, I'm sort of thinking I've got to find someone who can do that rather than try it myself, because
sure.
I could, we've done sort of mural stuff, I suppose, and imagery on walls and stuff. But when you hand it over to someone whose job that is, then first of all you're getting more expertise, but also you're getting a different outlook on what's going to come in and what's going to work, which I think is really exciting, that collaborative approach to creating a space. And you can almost just, as a designer, relax and allow the person like you to come up with a solution and then add that to the mix. I think that's a really nice way of working.
Yeah, it's quite nice for me to work with both way, the other way, in that for me, knowing that the person that I'm working with knows what they're doing, so I can't create those incredible elevations. I can't think about, okay, what tap and what light is going to go in there, what's the sink going to be, or what's the, if it's bathrooms, or what's the suite going to be, or how does it work with everything else that's going on. And so you become a small part sometimes, or a bigger part of the overall outcome. But putting trust in those designers that I know that are really good at all of that, and then you go, oh, great, yeah. And you feel honored to be a part of that scheme. When it really hangs together, you go, wow, yeah, what a privilege to be considered a part of this, and the outcome to work so well. So yeah, that takes the stress away for me as well, because you want your work to be viewed well, and you want, same with working with really good joiners, that, the Vitruvius work with incredible joiners, and yeah, phone them up, and someone picks up and you just hear some amazing racket in the background. Yeah, I'll call you back in a bit. And then you get a call back 15 minutes later, a guy called Mick, who's been a joiner for 50 years or whatever. And you're like, yeah, I know I'm in good hands here. You know, proper salt of the earth, been doing it all his life. And you know that you can ask him the right questions and get a good answer. And they'll, when they put it in there, you can trust them to do it really well, you know. So yeah, there's that, you know, designers trusting me to come up with a good idea, and then yeah, there's trust in all directions, really, isn't there, to make sure that you pull it off.
How experimental do you think your work is, and what's your thoughts on the balance between more commercial or work and experimental work, or where do you think you sit on that?
Well, I think I sit somewhere between, you know, because the wallpaper, there's a traditional aspect to that, which I love, you know, and it's part of the story of the work, you know, so the screen printing. But I also, you know, without technology, I wouldn't be able to translate my imagery across such varied materials, you know. So the laser engraving, I've even done digital. You've actually, well, I'll show you this. Obviously, you won't be able to see it on the podcast, but this is a metal laminate that I had digitally printed for a project. So I just think that when people are using technologies, I'm not like anti-technology. People sometimes assume that I am because of the traditional screen printing aspect. But I think all technologies can be applied with a mindfulness and a leaning towards craftsmanship. You know, I mean, when I think about traditional process, it's a technology. You know, it's just a technology that happens to be a bit older.
Yeah.
So I try to apply new technologies in interesting ways with the kind of craft sentiment, because I think it's quite easy to go, you know, what I see sometimes with, particularly maybe with undergraduates, is that, you know, the technology provides the answer, you know, and they go, okay, well, I can just click this repeat button or whatever on Photoshop and da 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 da. But sometimes when they go about things in a kind of slower way to kind of find the craft aspect within it, then the work becomes more interesting, even if the outcome is using a new technology and a digital shortcut in a way. You know, just to kind of slow things down can really help. I've got an interesting relationship with technology. I've not got my finger on the pulse of the latest materials and the latest processes, but if one of those processes or materials comes my way and there's an opportunity to explore it, I'm intrigued, you know, and I love the opportunity to kind of explore that as much as anything else.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just looking at those laser cut bits of, it looks like plywood panels with is it heron? Would it be a heron on the?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of a mixture of what feels like very traditional drawing style. Yeah. If that's right. Maybe sort of influenced by Japanese style illustrations or something. But then with this laser cut panels and, you know, the crispness of that, nice graphic quality with the textures and colors. It's you know, so it's got, I think that's that thing. It's the technology used with a sense of craftsmanship, isn't it? Yeah,
you know, and it's nice. Sometimes technology can, well, it can enable, you know, it enables new possibilities for my imagery. It can also dictate new directions that the imagery can take. So yeah, definitely fun to do that. I think if I hadn't, you know, if Vitruvius actually hadn't have said, go and have a look around the warehouse and take away some things and see what you can do, it was that made me get a tablet to draw with, so I could translate all my drawings into vector lines to be engraved. And I remember I did that probably 3 days of constant working, trying to fathom out if it would translate successfully. And I did some samples, and then I just, that was a real eureka moment, actually, because, I've etched into leather, into slate, onto wood, onto stone, and all sorts of outcomes because of that. Yeah, those projects have really helped to shape my offering and my career, really, to move it away from it just being printed wallpaper.
I'd like to thank Dan for taking the time to speak to me. It's really great to hear about his design process, how he got started, and that exploration of materials and processes that has led to him having a wide range of different applications for the interior space. It's a really great opportunity to introduce different imagery and also materials and textures into spaces that have a wonderful amount of skill in their production, but also have that element of narrative and storytelling, which can add to the whole concept that you're trying to create. Dan has a great mix of different approaches, from the traditional craft to digitally enhanced techniques, and his empathy with the materials and his application of skills creates a really lovely range of products. The collaborative approach and the trust involved between client and designer, and also designer and installer, is really key to the success of the projects that he's working on. The concept of narrative and storytelling is something that we are teaching our interior designers at the University of Plymouth. If you'd like to know how to be a kick-ass interior designer, follow the links to our course in the podcast notes. I'd like to thank Dave Clark from I Am The How for production support and invaluable advice in the setting up of this podcast, Kay Hansen for her planning support and co-hosting role in these and our educational podcasts for the University of Plymouth, and Mark Frith for the music. I'd really like to hear your feedback on the podcast. Leave a comment or get in touch via the website or on Instagram. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.